This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
The BFM Breakfast Grill, connecting you to top people and ideas. Powered by U Mobile, Malaysia's #1 5G network.
Good morning, you're listening to The Breakfast Grill. I'm Shazana Mokhtar. Sarawak has come a long way since 1963 and is charting a seemingly independent economic future that hinges on greater autonomy from the federal government. What's the pathway to shared development and prosperity for Sarawak and Malaysia as a whole, in line with the Dayak phrase Segulai, Sejalai, or onward together? To mark Sarawak Day, observed annually on 22nd July, which was just last week, we reflect on the past, present and future of the state with Datuk Dr. Madeline Burma, Fellow of Academy Science Malaysia, and Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania. Madeline, James, good morning and welcome to the Breakfast Grill.
Good morning.
Very good morning to all your listeners.
James, can we start with you, and maybe you could give us brief context as to why Sarawak Independence Day is observed on 22nd July as separate from Malaysia Day on 16th September when the Federation was formed.
So I think to understand the context of Sarawak Day, you need to understand two issues. One is the rise of Sarawak state nationalism, and this came about after 2008 when the Malay establishment in Malaya Peninsula under Najib realized that they required MPs from Sabah and Sarawak to remain in power. So that was the reason why shortly after that, Malaysia was declared a public holiday. So this, understanding of the importance of Sabah and Sarawak, so that sort of heightened the state or the rise of state nationalism. The reason why July 22nd is highly significant because there was a ceremony on that day when the last white governor, the British governor of a crown colony of Sarawak, left Sarawak officially and handed power to a state government in Sarawak that was comprised almost exclusively of Sarawakians and more importantly, led by a Sarawakian chief minister. So for those two reasons, that's the reason why 22nd of July is highly significant. And of course, recent history is that Tok Nam, the former Chief Minister of Sarawak, also declared 22nd officially as a public holiday in Sarawak, and he named it in the official gazette as Sarawak Day.
Right. So, and then it wasn't really until 2016 that Tok Nam gazetted that official holiday. So would you say that this marked a turning point in terms of Sarawak carving out its identity within Malaysia as a distinct entity, which has then progressed through renaming the chief minister as premier and describing Sarawak as a region rather than state? Is that what Sarawak is trying to do?
No. So the rise of state nationalism in Sabah and Sarawak has actually gone back a lot earlier. So if you look at Sarawak history, right from the set-go in 1963, the first party in power in Sarawak was called the Sarawak National Party, and the headline in the 1960s was actually Sarawak for the Sarawakians. So very early on, you had Sarawak nationalism. The problem is, in the old days, it was much harder to get the message out because UMNO was so dominant. But more importantly, in the old days, we don't have social media. So those state nationalists did not have a platform to organize. Now with the rise of social media, right, it's so easy to get your message out and it's so much easier to organize yourself.
I want to switch tack a little bit and look at the economic side of it because, Madeline, the World Bank in 2023 declared Sarawak a high-income state with its gross national income reportedly rising to $17,000. At the same time, though, according to the Department of Statistics Malaysia, Sarawak has the third highest poverty level behind Sabah and Kelantan. So why are both these facts true in Sarawak? What explains that poverty gap despite being a rich, productive state?
When we talk about the economics, this is really something of concern because I remember immediately after World Bank declared Sarawak as a high-income state or whatever you want to call it. Some people call it state, some say nation. Sarawakians tend to be very, very strong about the term used here. You see, how it is being measured is important to understand. You see, when you want to measure gross national product, it is just a total income. It's all about income. it does not look into the what we call equality. It does not look into poverty. What it does is just basically calculating what the state is earning for that year. So as far as the state is concerned, we have done very well. In terms of our export, and you look at our economic growth, it's one of the highest. And Sarawak contributed one of the biggest contributor to the national economy. Now, when DAWSOM, or Department of Statistics, revealed the data on poverty, that is a totally different indicator, because it measures the total household income registered in our what we call the e-KASE. e-KASE is the registry, and soon we may have even maybe PADU, which has not been really fully operationalized yet. So in e-KASE, Sarawak is the third highest in terms of incidence of poverty. On one hand, that is income is very high. We are the biggest, one of the biggest contributor to the national economy, and you look at our economic growth in terms of economic indicators, fantastic. But on the other hand, when we talk about human development, we talk about poverty, and we talk about inequality, that is another indicator that is often been used. That is the Gini coefficient. That has improved a bit, right? But there is still inequality. But that's basically what it is like in the state of Sarawak now.
What explains that inequality in Sarawak? I mean, is it pretty much the same as what we can see in other states as well? Or are there specific features of Sarawak that also contribute to that income inequality that we're seeing?
Okay, of course, first, the state government does not agree with the data, because I think they are doing a totally new research right now to come up with the real indicator of poverty. The state government of Sarawak has initiated a research conducted by its economic planning unit. It will come up with a new poverty data. So having said that, now when we look at the reasons for poverty, it's always been, of course, one is neglect, years of historical factors. I think James was right when we mentioned, I mean, in the past, we don't have the platform to discuss it. But now it is an open discussion. Like if you look at the 10 poorest states in Malaysia, 4 is in Sarawak, 6 in Sabah, or maybe about less than that, or 5 in Sabah, and 1 in Kelantan. So there is the historical factors. The second one is, of course, the geographical size and population-wise. Economically, I think Sarawak is doing a good job right now.
James, let's talk about that. To what extent has federal Malaysian politics, or to what extent does federal Malaysian politics explain the slow pace of socio-economic progress in Sarawak for the better part of its modern history? Can this mainly be attributed to that lack of implementation of the Malaysia Agreement 63, or are there other factors to consider?
So I think if you look back the history of Sarawak for the past 60 years, there are many factors to consider. But I think geography plays a big part, as my colleague Madeline has mentioned. But the bigger problem is the problem that faces both Sabah and Sarawak, which is the issue of federal implementation. In the old days, it was quite difficult to implement issues because everything had to be approved in Kuala Lumpur, Putrajaya. So, for example, right, if you want to build a school in rural Sarawak, it is not the local people who are the paymasters. You have to send the invoice all the way to Kuala Lumpur, and it takes months and months to get paid. And it's very difficult for the contractors to work, on those things. So I think one of the problems is that, the state is very big. In terms of the federal machinery working in Sabah and Sarawak, they have not done a very good job. Red tape is always a big issue, but it is sort of twice as difficult in Sabah and Sarawak. So for many reasons, I think, things have not worked out very well. But on the positive side, it is quite clear with the heightened awareness of MS63, the state government is now negotiating with the federal government to decentralize things like health administration and education autonomy. But recently, there was very good news that any federal project funded up to 50 million, the paymaster will now be based in Kuching. So it will be much easier for the contractors to deal with variations, with getting paid on time, all that sort of thing. So things are moving in the right direction. But there are certain built-in difficulties Sarawak face. As I mentioned already, geography. The other is, of course, the sparse population. And the third biggest challenge I see for Sarawak is really the education deficit. A lot of skilled people from Sarawak are actually not in Sarawak. Excuse the pun, but Madeline and myself are not in Sarawak. So, so that's an example of where, skilled people tend to head towards Klang Valley and Singapore. These are the two primary beneficiaries of the highly skilled people. So we really need all these people back. And so in terms of dealing with that, it is quite clear GPS has brought back English language education. They're building a set of international schools. So things are on track, and we need a bit of time for Sarawak to really move itself up to the next level. But unfortunately, the big thing is population. You can't force people to have more babies, but that's another story.
So some things are obviously structural, and those require different, levers to move. I'm speaking to economist Dr. Madeline Burma and political scientist Dr. James Chin. After the break, we'll discuss whether Sarawak nationalism benefits Malaysia. Stay tuned, BFM 89.9.
You are listening to The Breakfast Grill, brought to you by U-Mobile, Malaysia's #1 5G network.
Thanks for staying tuned to The Breakfast Grill. I'm Shazana Mokhtar, and with me on the show today are Dr. Madeline Burma, Fellow of Academy Science Malaysia, and Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania. In light of Sarawak Day, observed this month on 22nd July, we're discussing issues related to the economic and political progress of the state. James, could I just get you quickly to account for us what has been done in terms of MA63 under the Madani government? Just how much have they progressed, and what's actually left in terms of closing that gap in giving Sabah and Sarawak the rights that they have been accorded under this agreement?
Right. So the first MA63 committee that actually did some real work was under PH 1.0. Then they did resolve some of the key administrative roadblocks. But the big gains were actually made during the Ismail Sabri administration, when Sarawak managed to convince the Ismail Sabri administration to not to challenge the oil tax imposed by Sarawak. So Sarawak immediately gained at a minimum 3 billion extra ringgit in terms of revenue every year. So in terms of the Madani administration, they're dealing basically with health and education autonomy issues, plus some of the administrative roadblocks. But now they're talking seriously about removing federal control over some of the key infrastructure. So, for example, all the port system will be returned back to Sarawak. And Sarawak is in the process of acquiring its own retail commercial bank. And very shortly, they're thinking of setting an airline. So all this requires some sort of federal approval, or at least no objections from the federal level. So things are moving in the right direction. But again, all these things is dependent on whether the Malay establishment in Malaya is willing to right the historical wrongs. So the biggest items that people in Sabah and Sarawak are looking forward to over the next few years is really a constitution amendment that will return 1/3 of the seats to Sabah and Sarawak in terms of the parliamentary seats. This is crucial because this will cement the equal relationship between Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak, and this will fundamentally change federal-state relationship. Because the reality is that Sabah and Sarawak currently sits around 25% of the seats in parliament, and whether you like it or not, power equation in the federal government is all about the numbers game. So I think it's really, really important that the Sarawak government has put in a formal proposal to the federal cabinet to grant 35% of parliamentary seats to Sabah and Sarawak. If they can get that done in the next few years, I will say very good things about Madani.
So as James mentioned, because Sarawak is playing an even more significant role in federal politics, it also has that economic clout, yeah? So from your perspective, Madeline, how do you see Sarawak trying to position itself economically? How is it capitalizing on this newfound leverage that it has to make economic gains? And what exactly is it working to achieve, I suppose, in the longer term?
A lot of discussion has been going on right now. Everybody was asking, like, what makes Sarawak ticks? What it means here is that what is it that we have done right in terms of the state? So what I can say is post-COVID, the state has embarked on a structural change in terms of its economy. Now, in the past, Sarawak has always been relying basically the standard, what we call, first you start off with developing the primary sector, then followed by manufacturing. Okay, so what Sarawak did has moved on to the third level. If you look at it now, Sarawak is really all out in terms of its what we call the green economy. Okay, one of the states that is really promoting hydrogen economy. So this is something which I think all the other states have not been doing. Immediately after COVID, there's a lot of discussion saying that the states in Malaysia should move away from the previous path that what has blocked us from moving on. But what Sarawak did, I think Sarawak made that jump. It took a bigger step. What it did, go into digital economy, went into hydrogen economy, and now we are talking about green economy. So it is talking about something of a different level. But this is where what James' point came in. I think the issue of talent. Now, does the state have the resources? Although, efforts have been made in terms of developing our human capital development, but I still think that the brain drain is going to be an issue that needs to be addressed. Yeah? So if you ask me, what is it that makes Sarawak works right now? It's that structural change that is happening in the state economy.
I want to come to that issue of the brain drain and the education gap, which both you and James mentioned. The Sarawak Premier has stated his goal of making tertiary education free for Sarawakians. James, do you think this is a way to plug in that talent gap that currently exists? And is there a pathway for Sarawak to actually make this become a reality? Because we definitely see the Peninsular Malaysia and the federal government not really being able to push that vision through at this moment.
So I think this is quite a low-hanging fruit for me, simply because the Sarawak government has a direct stake in 3 locally based universities, one in Cebu, Kuching, Swinburne, and Curtin Miri. So in terms of making sure that Sarawakians get a place there is actually a marginal cost, because a lot of degrees like engineering, accountancy, you have to run those courses regardless of the numbers. So now the numbers are quite low. By offering scholarships, they can fill up the class at a very small marginal cost. I think the real kicker will be people who were considering doing a degree but didn't have the money to travel to West Malaysia private institutions. Now they know that they can do it back in Sarawak at very little cost. In fact, some of them can actually apply for living expenses scholarship as well. So there's a group of people, in Sarawak who, for financial reasons, cannot afford to go to West Malaysia. This is the group that will benefit substantially from the free education. And of course, some of the children from the rural areas who migrated to the urban areas, who finish Form 6, they will be able to get into the foundation program for free. And as you know, right, once you get in the foundation program, you are more likely to carry on in the same institution for your degree. So yes, it will plug a hole, not a very big hole, but it offers what I call a pathway. And I think it's very important that we offer pathways for people who ordinarily would not have that opportunity, a pathway to a university degree.
James, I want to focus on politics back again, because one curious feature of Sarawak politics, in contrast to Peninsular Malaysia and even Sabah, is that power continues to be concentrated very much in one party, and that's Gabungan Parti Sarawak, or GPS, whereas shifting alliances is what we're seeing in all the other states. So is Sarawak kind of modeling China's version of economic success, where growth doesn't have to come with overt political change?
I think you need to understand the dominance of GPS actually did not start recently. It started during the time of the previous chief minister because of this rise of Sarawak nationalism. So it is true that GPS control all the seats in day one other than 2 urban seats held by the DAP. But you have to remember their built-in advantage has always been the rural areas. They've always been very strong in the rural areas. So in terms of whether you can compare it to China, I don't think you can compare it to China. I don't think the China model, in some ways like the Singapore model, you can replicate it. Let me put it this way. I think many Sarawakians are quite happy that because Sarawak has abundant financial resources, it seems to be using the money to lay the foundation for Sarawak's prosperity in the coming years. So I think there is broad popular support for GPS. And my take is that if GPS doesn't have any scandals in the next 12 months or any big controversy, and most people expect the election to be held at least 1 year earlier, they will be, in a very good position to have a similar sweep like they did in the last state election.
And looking at the topic of Sarawak nationalism, is that a good thing for Malaysia? Because there are, of course, concerns that a stronger Sarawak will eventually result in it seceding from the Federation. Is that the eventuality that will happen? Or can Sarawak nationalism also coexist with Malaysian nationalism?
So in terms of state nationalism, right, people have this idea that what the Sarawakians do is something very new. As I mentioned earlier, historically, it's always been there. But this is nothing new. In fact, there's very strong state identity and nationalism in Johor and Kelantan as well. And one of the quirks of Malaysian history, which very few people know, is that, in fact, before Malaysia came into being, at the 11th hour, Kelantan actually launched a high court challenge to stop the federation from going ahead. So in terms of state nationalism, I think it's tied to state identity, culture, languages, history, all this sort of thing. So I don't think you can do much about it. I think the reality is that Malaysia is a federation of different states with different histories. I think your question of succession, I think that is a question that is too early to be asked now. I think looking at the horizon, especially for the next 5 or 6 years, I don't think there is a possibility of that happening. The reality is that the world is changing at a very fast pace. I don't think any of us are in a position to say that what will happen or what will not happen, beyond the next 5 years. Example of that is that, who would have thought that, the AI revolution in the last 3 years is going to wipe out many of the jobs that we have today.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Madeline, on the nationalism question, but maybe framed a little bit differently, because you've spent the bulk of your time in Peninsular Malaysia working in Bangi, Selangor. From a cultural and community standpoint, how much is Sarawak identity accepted as Malaysian and vice versa, I guess? Is there still a divide and understanding that needs to be bridged between East and West Malaysia?
Definitely, Shazana, because I have been in the the Jawatankuasa Perpaduan, So that is the only time that we can, the only time that we really sit down and discuss when we talk about identity or we talk about culture. I always say that we are only considered as Bunyi Putra. So that is one level. And then the other level is that we talk about Sarawak culture or Sabah culture. We are being portrayed like we are some exotic identity. There is this exotic ethnic from Sabah and Sarawak. Other than that, we are not considered as part of Malaysia. But things are moving fast. I'm not saying that we are not moving in the right direction. So I do hope that our education system forget about, this identity of Sabah, Sarawak, Semenanjung, Malaysia. If you look at our social media, we like to refer to each other, Melayu, China, India. I find very uncomfortable with that, after 60 over years of being an independent country. So I think there's a lot to learn from Sabah and Sarawak. But having said that, there is also the underlying current that is going on. There is also the move towards, like if you look at in Sarawak, Dayakism is getting very strong. And I'm sure, James, you're quite aware of that. You have done a lot of your work also on that. And I think it is something that Malaysia should look into also seriously. Don't think that when we classify as Bumi Putra, the Sabahan and Sarawakian are homogeneous. We are not. Okay? So it's kind of long-winded, but that is how I feel about it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of nuance that is being missed, I suppose, in these discussions about multiracial Malaysia. All right. The last question for both of you. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim has co-opted the Dayak phrase Segulai, Sejalai to show that the federal government is serious about ensuring the prosperity of the country is shared with East Malaysia and Sarawak. What do you want to see happen in terms of policy or legal reform for this to become a reality? If we'll start with James and we'll end with Madeline.
Okay, so I think the most important thing is to make sure that Sabah and Sarawak get 1/3 of the seats and they adopt the Sarawak proposal for 35% of the seats, because that will fundamentally change the character of the federal-state relationships in Malaysia. That's number one. Secondly, I would like to see the federal government resolve some of the key issues at MA63. Third, I think we need more decentralization to Sabah and Sarawak. Not to weaken the federal government, but to make sure that the public delivery system is more efficient. And the fourth point is that really the West Malaysian or the Malayan establishment should accept the fact that there is diversity in the Malaysian system. It's not one model fit all. I think that's the important lesson that they have to learn from Sabah and Sarawak. As Madeline says, Sabah and Sarawak are really the epitome of multiculturalism, multi-religious state. And I think that is something Malayans need to learn again. The reason why I say learn again is that Malaya was actually very similar to Sabah Sarawak in the 50s and 60s until, shall we say, one political party dominated the Malayan political process for 40 years and it turned everything upside down. So I think maybe it's time for Malaya to relearn the lessons, and instead of looking elsewhere, why don't they look towards the east? Thank you.
Madeline, last word to you.
Yeah, for me, being and coming from economics background, I would like to see better allocations, federal allocations to the states and the lagging states like Sabah, Sarawak, Kelantan, Terengganu. So especially during the annual budget, because if you look at the annual budget, it's kind of centralized, and a lot of time we see that the budget allocation to Sabah and Sarawak is a bit something that I thought that it should be more than that. Okay, that's number one. Number two, yes, MA63. And number three, and I do hope that Malaysia is more, how am I going to say it? More tolerant, or no, not really tolerant, acceptable to our diversity, because it has always been seen as in Sabah and Sarawak ni nak merdeka ke? That kind of things. Or when we talk about diversity here, the differences in terms of ethnicity, culture, religion especially. So the issue has to be addressed in menarik rambut dalam tepung, is it? Be very, very careful, So that's the kind of Malaysia that I would love to see in the next 5 years or more.
Madeline, James, thank you very much for speaking with me and for ending on that really important point of recognizing the diversity of Malaysia. Thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been speaking to Dr. Madeline Burma, Fellow of Academy Science Malaysia, and Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania. This has been The Breakfast Grill on BFM 89.9.
Beyond financial mastery, The Breakfast Grill with U-Mobile Biz, Malaysia's #1 5G network. 5G makes business sense.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.